Back in the GOAT District, we're live in week 14. I got my man Bradley Stadler with me. How you doing tonight, Bradley?
Killing it. Ready for week 14.
Yeah, you ready for BYE-MAGGEDON?
Right or not, here it comes.
There you go. There you go. Let's get after it.
GOAT District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be trading. And I always be trading. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
So, Bradley, I think we might have the two best intro songs going in fantasy right now. Hat tip to Billy Muzio. He does a nice intro as well, but I feel like ours are right up there.
Gabe crushes it in the intro game, so shout out to him.
It's like we do the ballin' ones, which is our best ball one, and that's an excellent song as well. So yeah, shout out. Definitely some fire. But this week we loaded it up. We had Pat Carrain last night, NBC Sports Edge. It was great. It was a really good show. We got into a lot of topics, and now tonight we have Bradley Stadler. Bradley is putting out sharp content on the regular. He's putting out a tremendous amount of content. He's a really, really sharp guy and a friend. Bradley, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you right now and what you're putting out?
Sure. So lots of videos popping over on the YouTube channel for Best Bell Fantasy. That's where I put a lot of my video content. I do a couple live streams a week and then chop those up too and give some individual player takes for the algo, And then write an article a week for Fantasy Data where I talk about my rankings and compare those to the consensus. It's always interesting to talk not just about what players I like, but also players that yes, everyone else might like too. And so that's a really challenging but fun article to do every week. And then they just released week 13's rankings. I finished in the top 10 at wide receiver for this week. So that was really nice. Finished as the top 5 kicker ranker for this week. So that was also good. Number 4 at IDP. So I don't even know how to spell IDP, but we're doing the best we can with talking defensive players too. And then I do an article once a week for Top Prop Fantasy. If you haven't checked them out, it's more like a social DFS. So you and a buddy might disagree on 2 players and, you got to pick which prop is the best. So Top Prop, I write an article a week where I compare 3 sets of props. And then I just started with full-time fantasy, writing an article 2 a week with them. Actually, once we get off here, I'm going to crank out some starts and sits for this week. And that's also getting into it. Lots of fun, lots of content. This is the grind, Theo. This is where we make all the money, all of the decisions. And it's exhausting, but it all leads up to these couple weeks where, we got to make decisions about our waivers. We got to make decisions about start sits. And that's what's going to propel us in the playoffs and the money. So
you're right about that. I mean, it's grind time. This is the week that you really, really want to be as careful as possible. I'm in the DMs with my co-managers, or I'm texting with them, trying to make the best possible decisions. Either if you're playing in this week for anything, then you've had a pretty good season. So you're either getting into a playoff in a home league, or you're getting ready for the sprint in high stakes.
Right.
If you're a best ball player, hopefully you're winding it down and you're looking to make some money. Dan, how pure did you run last night in terms of a fantasy sweat with your teams on Monday night. I know me and you, we survived. This is
Right.
back-to-back years. Dan and I are a co-managed FFPC main event team where we're in a championship game, and I don't mind our chances this week, Dan. I think we've got a couple positions to navigate, but we're able to bully on the fab. We have $4, and the other manager only has $1. So that's like you're walking around feeling like a king right now. But why don't you tell everybody about your sweat from last night?
Yeah, I'm just worried about the guy who's playing in the third place game with $16 that he's gonna like hose us over somehow. But he's stocked at running back, and so hopefully he's not gonna be looking for any of the same guys we are. But anyway, yeah, last night, it all came down basically to the last drive that Tampa did. I had one team where I was just barely ahead with Tom Brady on my team of a team that had Mike Evans. And so if Brady had thrown too much on that drive to Evans or thrown him a touchdown, I would have lost that game. At the same time, you and I were looking for Godwin to not get too many points, so that we would win our matchup. And then I had yet a third place where I was not playing directly against Lance at Sports Betting Man, but he was just in front of me for the fourth spot in a FFPC Dynasty League where the top four get 2 victory points for their points, and I needed to get 4 victory points this week to maintain my my hold on 6th and then last place in the playoffs, which I did by that last Godwin catch. Gave me just enough points to get over Lance and grab that 4th victory point. So it all worked out.
It was an awesome ending. I love Rachaad White. I mean, that's a guy we've been on in the GOAT District for a long time, and it was like almost like a movie where he has the fumble and then is able to have the game-winning catch, and for Brady to go back to him and have the confidence in him. That's a guy that I'm just super, super excited for next season. I think like where he ends up in redraft will be very interesting, but like rest of the season, if you have Rachaad White, he's had 15 catches over his last 2 games on 17 targets. I mean, that's about as good as it gets for a running back. That's like McCaffrey-esque. What are your thoughts on him, Bradley, and any other takeaways you had on the game?
Yeah, it was impressive that he was the juxtaposition of Keyshawn Vaughn. Like if you think a couple years ago, there was it's seared into my brain because Keyshawn Vaughn was not catching the passes and in fact had a very memorable catch, turn, fumble, lost, and then was benched pretty much the rest of the game. That got me negative points because I had to start Keyshawn Vaughn that week. Yeah, right. You're never going to forget those. But then, like the idiot that I am, I drafted, the 3rd round running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in my dynasty leagues yet again. And here we are. Rachaad White is so much of a better player. And I think that, his pass catching acumen coming into the league was really nice. I wonder if he's going to get stuck in this running back dead zone next year. I think a lot of it is going to be dependent upon who the quarterback is going to be for Tampa Bay, whether they're going to be utilizing him in that way, because we know how Brady hyper targets the running back. And so, I mean, White
he will absolutely be in the dead zone.
Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. But that's like the kind of appealing dead zone profile we kind of like, right. Those pass catching guys.
Right. Yeah, you don't want the Leonard Fournette dead zone profile, which is basically just waiting to lose all of his snaps. So and really, I don't know. Fournette may not be with the Bucs next year. Tom Brady may not be with the Bucs next year, for all we know. So, there's a lot of things going on there. But Fournette definitely was not cuttable this year. Next year, he's a little bit more cuttable. He's got an $8.5 million cap hit, only $5 million dead cap. I mean, so it's not nothing for dead cap, but it would save them, 3.5. So,
yeah, it'll be a fun one to talk about in the postseason. But I think that moving forward, Rachaad White, I think we can call him kind of a safe low end RB2 just based on this pass catching volume. This week is kind of a disaster in terms of Lamar Jackson. If I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, it sounds like he'll miss about 3 weeks. I think that's a pretty safe bet. If he beats it, great. And we could push this to 4 weeks. So Lamar Jackson managers are scrambling. And then you have that on top of that, Jimmy Garoppolo managers are kind of in disarray because he's done for the year. There's some reports that I guess if he could play in the Super Bowl, if I'm reading these new injury reports, he avoided the list, Frank, but consider him dust. How are you guys navigating the quarterback waters here? And I want to get your take, Bradley, on 3 guys: Mike White, Tyler Huntley, and Ryan Tannehill, and Dan as well. And how would you handle it if you lost one of these 2 guys to injury?
Yeah, so if I'm ranking these players, I'll go with Mike White first. I think he's in a clear tier above the rest. Then Ryan Tannehill, then Huntley, and then if you're in desperate straits, Purdy seems to be the guy in San Francisco for right now. The reason why you have to be bullish on White is not only because of what he's done in the past. We've seen 3 top 7 quarterback finishes in his starts. Like, he's shown us some ceiling in his willingness to throw the ball down the field, but also he's got some green matchups later on the season. Yes, he gets the Bills this week, but the Bills are not the 0 that they were last year. And then after he escapes Buffalo, he gets Detroit, Jacksonville, and Seattle. Talk about like green matchups for not only the quarterback position, but also the wide receivers there. Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, and hopefully the reemergence of Elijah Moore. I think the Jets are on the upswing when it comes to offense. So if I'm in a clear tier above, and there are some people who are really skeptical about Mike White, and I think he's still on a lot of waivers. So if you are in desperate need, I would make him a stronger priority than the Tannehills. Like Tannehill, we know what he is. He's a solid quarterback too, with a really bad pass catching core that could be hurt with Treylon Burks possibly out. And then Huntley had one really good game. But he also gives you a safe rushing floor, 40 rushing yards or more in all 5 of his games that he played the majority of snaps. So at least last year. So that's how I'm viewing them right now. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I mean, it's got to be Mike White in the lead. I don't love Tannehill, definitely don't love Huntley, but you do what you got to do. I mean, if you're relying on Jimmy Garoppolo, you have more problems than just Garoppolo's injury.
You are a low end streamer at that point,
right? Yeah,
by score.
It's quite possible that you might actually make a move to the positive here. Though, if you're starting Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm going to assume that you're in a 2 quarterback league, and most or all these guys are gone anyway. But you never know. But yeah, I don't love Tannehill because especially if Burks is out, we could really see this. Even though he's got some juicy matchups, it could still be the Derrick Henry show. And none of his other pass catching options are really that great. But sometimes the great matchup does make it possible for him to give you at least a decent score. Tyler Huntley last year did not do. My memory of Tyler Huntley last year was like, yeah, he did pretty good down the stretch. And then I looked at what his actual fantasy numbers were. It was like, let's walk that back a little bit. He had basically 3 of his 5 games that he started, he failed to crack 15 points in FFPC scoring.
And then he had the 40-point week.
Where
he went insane. So I feel like it's kind of like it's like a Mandela effect, where we kind of remember things differently.
Right.
And like when I was kind of on the so I'll back up a step. I think like when you think of Huntley, like you kind of think of like a like for like replacement where he's going to get all the rush attempts, but he's very appealing. And certainly if I needed a quarterback this week, I would prioritize Huntley. Like for instance, if I was a Justin Fields manager and I had him on bye week this week, I would go hard to get Huntley. But if it was rest of the season, I think it's clearly Mike White. I agree with you guys on that one. He had 315 yards passing, and and that was in the pouring rain and cold. I was at that game, and it was not a nice day in North New Jersey. And then 369 yards this past week against Dan's Minnesota Vikings secondary, which is a little choppy right now. But he looks really good, and I think they run a kind of like a confident, diverse offense where they're willing to spread it around. The Jets have a little bit of juice, and I think you kind of ride that. Bradley talked about the playoff schedule. Neither one of you is excited about Ryan Tannehill. I'm just going to throw out the name Kenny Pickett. Do either one of you have any interest in Kenny Pickett as like a QB2 emergency play or any appeal in Superflex? How would you compare him to Tannehill, Dan? Would you rather have Tannehill or Pickett?
I think I'd rather roll with Tannehill, honestly.
Okay.
Pickett is definitely getting down into the desperation area. He's only averaging about 15 points a game, so it's pretty tough. I mean, I'd almost consider like Andy Dalton over him. If I was relying on Pickett, I'd even take like Brock Purdy as a backup if I had to. It just could be that bad.
And Bradley, what's your thoughts on Pickett? Anything to add with him?
Yeah, I mean, George Pickens has been struggling to get the targets down the field. Deontay Johnson has been gathering the targets, but they've been low ADOT type of reception, so that's not going to. You'd almost hope that it was flipped, and then maybe you could see a little bit more, optimism for Kenny Pickett. But if you continue to pepper these low target type of receivers, it's not going to work out too worry. And actually, 1912 fantasy, I was going to bring this up. Jared Goff is like, he should be in this mid quarterback one streaming conversation. He's only rostered on 30% of like Yahoo leagues, and he gets the Vikings this week. And if there's a smash matchup for passing, we just saw, you mentioned the Vikings, but giving up so many passing yards, but it's also that this is in a dome. It's at Detroit, right? The emergence of Jameson Williams, the whole bit. I know that we're getting a little bit off, but like,
I mean, I would have Goff. I would have Goff ahead of those guys as
Absolutely.
well. But I feel like Goff, at least in terms of the higher stakes leagues, is rostered at this point.
Yeah.
So Mike White would kind of be the guy I would go for. Shout out to the chat, 1912 in the chat. Shout out to Jose Pena. Jose Pena, thank you for the waiver wire content. Appreciate that. We put out a waiver wire show today. Jose, definitely check it out. Help you navigate these waters. But want to keep going here. We have, besides the injuries, which was not just the QBs, but we also have this horrible bye week hell where it's 6 teams on bye Maggedon part 2. First off, how dumb is it that the NFL has 6 teams on bye week in week 14, where some teams had their bye weeks like 2 months ago, and now you're interjecting like 6 teams to get a rest here. I feel like it's kind of like not only unfair to fantasy players, which I know they don't really necessarily care about, but they should, but it's unfair to certain NFL teams who get this, extra rest this late in the season. I mean, Dan or Bradley, do you have any thoughts on just the very late bye weeks?
I'm hoping that this will catalyst into one bye week earlier in the season and one bye week later in the season, that eventually the NFL will come to its senses and get 2 bye weeks for teams if they're going to expand to, I think the eventual plan is to get to 18 games in the season. They're going to need 2 different bye weeks. And so this is like this awkward transition, I think, between the 16 and 18 games, and hopefully, this can be remedied here in the next couple of years, because as you mentioned, it's really inconvenient. I think it is a disadvantage. And it's inconvenient for a lot of fantasy players because the fantasy playoffs, there are some high stakes leagues or other places where playoffs start this week.
Yep.
Like
we
that's
had
ridiculous.
In FFPC, we had playoffs last week and this week. This is the championship week. And then for NFFC and FFWC, this is the final week. And you're done with waivers after this week. So it's very tricky. Obviously, it's more tricky for the FFPC player because it's more impactful. Dan and I are playing for $4,000 this week.
Right.
Nice little Christmas pocket change, Dan. And NFFC, still you're playing for prizes because, the money's decided this week for the regular season, and then who gets to the postseason is also going to be decided. So, Dan, what are your thoughts on kind of the way that the NFL does this?
Yeah, I mean, I totally hate it. Basically week 13 and week 14, 25% of the NFL is on bye between those 2 weeks. And, that's a lot for this late in the season. I feel like, I understand why they're not doing bye weeks in like the first, 5 or so weeks of the season. I mean, nobody really needs it then. But, I don't want to speculate too much on what it's going to be like when we have, 18 games and we have 2 bye weeks per team. That's going to get really ugly for fantasy, because you think about how many teams are on bye right now, because again, they're not going to be throwing any of those bye weeks in the first few weeks or the last few weeks, so everything's going to be jammed in the middle. So you're going to see probably weeks where like there's 10 teams on bye or something, which is that's not great for the NFL product either, I don't think. So maybe they'll keep it at 1 bye week, I don't know.
And you could have easily had 4 teams on bye last week and 4 teams on bye this week if you wanted to do it like that. It's just the fact that they go 2 and then 6 is kind of crazy, but it is what it is. So the teams that are on byes are Atlanta, Chicago, Green Bay, Indianapolis, New Orleans, and Washington. So there's obviously some very impactful fantasy starters. We talked about Justin Fields, Aaron Jones. You now have Christian Watson. You have obviously Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman. You have Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, who was really non-existent last night, but he's absolutely a starter. And then you have Terry McLaurin. How about guys that I maybe didn't mention? Are there any bye week sneaks, Bradley, that maybe somebody, especially in like a home league, might have access to that could potentially be cut this week and then really help you out in the fantasy playoffs?
For sure. One that comes to mind is Jahan Dotson, the first-round pick for Washington. I mean, Treylon Burks has had his time. Christian Watson has had his time. Garrett Wilson's had his time. Right? Drake London has had his moments. But Jahan Dotson's been like this forgotten first-round pick, and I'd come around to drafting a lot of him in the best ball. But, I mean, he came off 3 weeks where he was eased in from injury and finally just explodes back onto the scene, was wide receiver 18 last week. 9 targets, 5 receptions. He had the touchdown. He played 85% of the snaps, and he got back to what he was doing with Carson Wentz back during the first 4 weeks, where 3 of those 4 weeks he was a top 24 wide receiver. So if you're looking for a flex play later on, and this is what we're talking about sneaking, like he's not going to show up in the projected points, right? You're going to see like the 7 or 8 pointers, the ones that don't matter. But Jahan Dotson is a player that can be a wide receiver too, a flex play for you here come in near the end of the season.
Dan, any other thoughts on Jahan Dotson?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Dotson is a great sneaky one to bring on board if he's available. Another one I'd throw in there is Khalil Herbert.
Yes.
He should be coming off IR, I think, this week. And, he was handling close to 50% of the touches for Chicago on the ground, or at least the running back touches. And Justin Fields is not running quite as much, or at least he didn't this past week. So things could be setting up really nicely for Herbert. So if anybody, had to drop him due to, all the bye week problems we're having right now, and you can pick him up, that's definitely a great move. Another one I'd throw out there, this one's a little bit more off the wall maybe, but Romeo Doubs. I don't think, he's going to probably come back this week. I don't think he's going to be on many people's radars. Everybody's kind of, they're all in love with Christian Watson. But Alan Lazard is not really doing anything special, and they may want to see what Doubs can do the remainder of this year. I mean, it's a lost season for Green Bay. So if they're putting Jordan Love out there potentially, I think they might kind of de-emphasize Lazard a little bit and emphasize Doubs and guys like that. Maybe even Samurai Torre. Might be a really sneaky one for really, really deep leagues. And
then, do you guys have any interest in Rashid Shaheed, who had, I think that's one that's kind of sneaky for me because He's so explosive, and all it takes is one type player. And going into the bye week, I think they gave him 4 targets last night. So you go into these bye weeks and these teams self-scout. He might be a guy that you could. I mean, I know he's available in pretty much everywhere in high stakes, so you can actually get him. I completely agree on Jahan Dotson, and I agree on Khalil Herbert, but I think those guys are going to be a little less available. But like if you're going super deep, I think that Shaheed is interesting. Dan, any thoughts on him and Bradley as well?
Yeah, I'll jump in with. Oh, you go for it, Dan.
Yeah, Shaheed is one of those guys that he's only going in your lineup as a prayer.
You're holding your breath and you want a long touchdown.
Yep, but if you can get that 70 yards and a score, you're in good shape.
So you're saying he's Gabe Davis?
A much cheaper Gabe Davis, yeah. I don't really want to talk about Gabe Davis right now.
No. We'll save that for the off season. It's too depressing.
There we go. Yeah. And 1912, I think is trying to say week 16. I'm not sure what he's talking about. If he's talking about Khalil Herbert or
week 16. Yeah, Khalil Herbert, I believe, is week 16. Shout out to 1912.
He went. Let's see. Week he was put on IR before week 11, right? So 11, 12, 13, 14. So you should be able to come back in week 15.
That I need to double check. But either way, I agree with you. I mean, if you get 2 starts out of him in the fantasy playoffs, especially with attrition, where things happen, you've seen a lot less talented players than Khalil Herbert have good week 16s. So he's definitely one. And then how about
1912 is right. There was a bye in there, which can't count for IR. So he is not coming back until week 16. That's a good point.
And then Deion Jackson's been dealing with injury, but are you trying to hold on to your Jackson shares where you can, Dan, or are you parting ways? And I ask you that because we'll put it in the high stakes context where you're not going to be able to carry him into the playoffs.
Yeah, that's one I'm kind of taking on a case by case basis. If I feel okay at running back, he might be one of those that I'm actually getting rid of. But if if I'm really desperate at running back, I'm going to be dropping some of those wide receivers that'll probably never hit my lineup, and I'm going to be putting guys like Deion Jackson and Matt Breida and guys like that onto my teams. So he could go either way for me.
Now let's do a little bit of dumpster diving. Let's talk about this week specifically. Who are some possible players that you can add that might be on the waiver wire that you could plug into your lineup? Any kind of sneaky starts for this week? Bradley, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, let me pull up the Fantasy Pros rankings. It's the first time. So today is Tuesday, and I'm finally looking at the rankings and some deeper dive players. If we're skeptical about Jameson Williams getting any snaps at all, Khalif
2
Raymond
routes run this past weekend in his first game back. 2 routes run.
Yeah, Khalif Raymond. The Minnesota Vikings give up the most receiving yards to wide receivers. That's interesting to me. Same with Josh Reynolds. Like, I'm not sure which one I want, but that's going to be discernible. I want one of those outside wide receivers. And let's see who else. Or DJ Chark, even if you're not sure about a flex play. Marvin Jones. The Tennessee Titans give up the most wide receiver touchdowns and the most fantasy points to wide receivers. So if you're looking for a deeper flex play, Marvin Jones is someone that you could consider. And at running back, let's not discard Zonovan Knight right away. Michael Carter's supposed to be back for this game, but the rumblings are that Zonovan Knight is still going to be the lead back, even with Carter back. He was earning a role even before the Carter injury. So not just that, like, Zonovan Knight is going to get some run, but he very well may be the lead back and worthy of starting in your leagues as we get into week 14.
Yeah, I think Zonovan Knight is for me like a back end RB2. Like I think he looks tremendous. He has over 100 yards in back-to-back games. He looks like the most comfortable running on any running back we've seen for the Jets besides obviously Breece Hall this year. He's like, what they've been lacking. So I completely agree with you. I think Carter is the change of pace, and Knight is the back you want. Dan, anything to add on any of these guys we talked about, or do you have any other kind of sneaky starts, dumpster dive guys?
Yeah, so a couple of them, if Michael Carter doesn't come back, then we got to go with Ty Johnson, because he's a guy who can, he's going to be in the Michael Carter role if Carter's not there, and that's probably going to be worth, 8 to 12 points, something like that. And then in Seattle, we don't really know what's going on exactly, but there's some Seattle running backs you can take some shots at. It sounds like DJ Dallas maybe has the high ankle sprain.
That's what we were talking about in the pre-show. It's an absolute mess because
yeah,
DJ Dallas has the high ankle, and Pete Carroll said it's kind of a high ankle sprain, which means it's probably a very bad high ankle sprain. Probably means he's getting ankle surgery at the very moment we're talking. And then
or they're amputating. Who knows? I mean,
Homer's got the knee strain.
Yeah, you got to kind of hope Homer comes back. If he comes back, he's definitely the pickup. I think I'm trying to think who's the who's that third running back. I'm blanking on his name.
We talked about it. Like they signed Wayne Gallman.
Yeah,
and I feel like Wayne Gallman probably just jumps Tony Jones. Or do you?
Tony Jones. That's it. Thank you.
It's super choppy.
Gross.
It's super choppy.
Yeah. At that point, you are very, very desperate. You have found the layer of sludge at the bottom of the dumpster, and you're
Oscar the Grouch at that point. You're living in the dumpster.
Yes.
I'll throw out to you guys, instead of trying to navigate, if it was like a 1 week start, instead of trying to navigate the running backs in Seattle, Noah Fant looks pretty good right now, and I think that there's a chance that they could be a little more pass happy with Geno willing to take shots. Noah Fant had 4 catches. He found the end zone. He had probably his best game of the season fantasy-wise. So that would be like, again, we're talking dumpster diving. We're talking about I'm in a bind. I need to find somebody who I can stick in my lineup and hope that they get me, 10 to 15 points. And I'll throw Noah Fant in that. And then I love your Ty Johnson call. That was going to be the guy I was going to talk about, because if we're kind of scared of the Buffalo matchup, Ty Johnson would be one that we would use. We know he's got a history with Mike White, and Ty Johnson has had double-digit PPR points now in back-to-back weeks. So he's definitely one you throw in there. And then we're going to talk about tight ends in a little bit, but your thoughts on Chig Okonkwo, the Maryland Terrapin, now Tennessee Titan, who led the Titans in targets, led the Titans in yardage this past weekend. Obviously, it helped his stat line that Treylon Burks went out. It was very unfortunate. Treylon looked incredible on the touchdown catch. Looked like he was going to have his huge game that we've kind of been waiting on, and he goes out with a concussion. So that was unfortunate, but let's say he misses. The Tennessee Titans wide receivers are very dusty right now. Robert Woods, we shouldn't even mention his name, because he's I said last night on the pod, I think Dontrell Hilliard would be a more productive wide receiver at this point than Robert Woods. Do you roll with Chig? Like I think I'd be pretty bullish on him if Treylon Burks is out. Your thoughts, Dan? You're the tight end whisperer.
I mean, I don't hate it, but the targets there are just not predictable at all. So it could be Chig with 6 targets, or they could go back to Austin Hooper, or they could just decide they're going to feature Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. So who knows? But at least with Chig, you're talking about there's some underlying talent there, and if all else fails, I'd rather bet on talent than just trying to guess who's getting the most targets.
4.540 for Chig. Shout out to 1912. Says he's a baby Jonnu Smith. I like that. Very Jonnu Smith-esque in terms of athleticism.
Yeah, let's hope he comes up with a better career than Jonnu.
Yes. The profile. The profile.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, NFL-wise,
getting
Jonnu's
paid
great.
like Jonnu.
That's it. Get that Jonnu money.
For sure.
So Chig's a rookie, and obviously I would say this rookie class has exceeded a lot of people's expectations. I think in terms of dynasty, people were slightly sour on using 2022 first round picks because of this vaunted 2023 class. But I think the 2022 class is definitely punched above their weight class. They've certainly exceeded expectations. I don't think it's even an argument at this point. How good are these rookie wide receivers? Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, I'll throw Christian Watson in there based on his productivity, but how special is this class of wide receivers? Are we talking about a class that we look back in 5 years and we're like, this is one of the better classes? Or is this just a guys jumping into opportunity and maybe capped ceilings? Bradley, kind of a big picture perspective on these rookie wide receivers you're seeing this season.
Yeah, I wouldn't go quite 2013 wide receiver class, but this is one that I think was underrated. There were a lot of people chattering about how the 2022 class is one of the worst classes they've ever seen. But one of the takeaways from this class was it was very wide receiver deep. And with the emergence of Christian Watson at the combine, solidifying it, plus Treylon Burks doing what he did, right, we knew that Garrett Wilson was going to be a stud, top 10 pick, early declare. Ohio State, he crushed. And both him and Olave forced out Jameson Williams. We haven't seen anything from Jameson Williams so far. So there's a potential for there to be, Olave, Wilson, Watson, Williams, Dotson, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, underrated first-round wide receiver.
Drake London
even. We haven't even breathed about Drake London yet. And so this is, I think, a really underrated class. I think you're going to have a couple of wide receiver ones moving forward. Like Garrett Wilson is printing himself into that wide receiver one conversation in Dynasty. And then I think I wouldn't be surprised even if he's already in like keep trade cut in that top 12, top 10 wide receiver for Dynasty already. Just with the talent he's shown with the backup quarterbacks. Like imagine if the Jets go out and upgrade from Mike White, or if Mike White actually is the answer here.
Just a normal quarterback. Like
anybody.
Yeah, like literally any QB that you're able to run an NFL, like Jimmy Garoppolo type, as a Jameis Winston type. Literally any QB that you consider in like the 15th to 20th best in the league. You're loving Garrett Wilson. It's
such a shame, though. You mentioned Jameis Winston. It's such a shame that he's not the quarterback with Chris Olave there in New Orleans, because we could be seeing 300 air yards a game from Jameis Winston to Olave. He was already, leading the NFL for a streak there with air yards. So get a good quarterback in Atlanta, Mariota, get him 35 to 40 pass attempts a game. Like, I don't think Desmond Ridder is going to be the answer, but maybe he is. Like, could Desmond Ridder be Alex Smith? Could he be? Possibly. Like, I wouldn't hate that. And I don't think fantasy managers should hate that either if we get a little bit more aggressive play calling from Arthur Smith there in Atlanta. I think that's what's holding back Drake London. It wasn't Kyle Pitts. So, yeah, I think this is probably a 50th to 60th percentile class for wide receivers, but it should be perceived even higher because of how low the rest of the class was viewed.
Dan, anything to add kind of big picture wise with how you're viewing this class?
Yeah, I think it's a good class. I would put it probably in like the 80th percentile. 2014 was obviously the gold standard, but this one's stacking up pretty well. And one of the things I like is that a lot of these guys are really young. Some of the wide receiver classes that we've had come through in previous years, we've had some 22, 23, 24-year-old rookies. 22 is not bad, but when you start getting into 23 and 24-year-old guys, like Terry McLaurin came in old, guys like that. And, most of these guys are all 21, 22, which is what you really want to see. And we do have, as Brad was saying, there's a lot of good players that have already shown out at the top. I mean, and then other guys like London, Pickens, they just need a quarterback. And, even some of the guys a little bit further down, Wan'Dale Robinson could end up being something. Alec Pierce could end up being something. David Bell even could end up being something. John Mechie we haven't seen at all. And he's got a profile that I really liked. So there's a lot of interesting names still in there, but what we've already seen, is telling us this is a pretty good class.
Yeah, I agree with Dan. I think it's like an 80th percentile class, and I think when we get into the more dynasty centric podcast in the summer, it's going to be really interesting to try to rank our wide receivers in dynasty. But I'll tell you what, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are going to be way, way, way up there. Garrett Wilson has 5 games with over 90 or more yards receiving. Olave has 3. But Wilson having 5 is pretty nuts. And I know it's kind of cherry-picking data, but Justin Jefferson had 7 his rookie season. Jamar Chase had 6. Jalen Waddle had 3. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 4. CeeDee Lamb had 2. T. Higgins had 3. So Garrett Wilson right now with 5. He had those games with Zach Wilson where a couple of them were mixed in. I mean, he's able to really take over an NFL game. And I think by the end of the summer, I think he might be like wide receiver 5 in Dynasty based on how he finishes this season. Because like Dan said, he's young. He had a perfect, clean profile, top 10 NFL pick in the draft. There's so much to like about him. And he's about to break Keyshawn Vaughn's Jets record. He could do that. He could do that in 1.5 games based on what he's doing. So I think that we had the narrative that it was like a lot of very good wide receivers. And I think some of those good wide receivers are elite. And then you have the Christian Watson factor where he's just this athletic freak who's running away from defenses like a Tyreek Hill type athlete. So it's definitely a class that we should be very excited about, and we should be excited about a couple of these guys to help us win leagues. Let's get
Theo real quick on that.
Oh,
sure. Brad had mentioned the keep trade cut, so I just went over there real quick because I thought that was a great idea to take a look there. Garrett Wilson is the top ranked rookie wide receiver on there. He is number 27 overall. He's the number 11 wide receiver. But between
I see Olave there at 8, wide receiver 8 right now.
Oh yeah, I missed that. Okay, yeah, Olave is at wide receiver 8 at 21, yeah. And then you have Garrett Wilson at 27. Then you have Christian Watson at 44, Jameson Williams at 47, Burks at 48, Pickens at 50. So and these guys are already rated above, like Devontae Smith, Michael Pittman, Marquise Brown, Brandon Ayuk, so they're rated up. They're already going ahead of some rather youngish wide receivers, that still should be pretty productive for several years. So, if you're looking to flip one of those guys, now might be the time to do it.
I mean,
yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Dan, and Bradley, I'll get your perspective on this too, but we talk about flipping those guys. Like at this point, would you I don't even know why, like, to me, it's like, if I have, it's like a bird in a hand type thing here where people are so excited about this 2023 class, but it's like, why would you trade Garrett Wilson for the 103? Just why would you do that? You're overcomplicating everything. Like, would you even think of that? I mean, I get the 101. I get Bijan Robinson being this, generational Jonathan Taylor type running back prospect, but moving one of these guys just seems kind of crazy to me.
I think the other way is what you want to do. You want to go after these. Like if you can trade your Diggs plus to get Garrett Wilson, if you can trade your AJ Brown plus to get Chris Olave, those are the types of moves that can buy you more equity, but keep you in the same tier. And like AJ Brown right now is the wide receiver 4. Jalen Waddle, I mean, I like Jalen Waddle, but is he the wide receiver 3 in Dynasty? I think that's a little spicy based on, if you're comparing your thoughts versus consensus, I think that's a little much, like if you can trade Jalen Waddle for Garrett Wilson plus, that's what you're looking to do.
Yeah, definitely. And you can kind of go like I was going to mention this in 1912, had it right on the head. Flip Watson right now, because you could flip Watson for, you could trade Watson for Marquise Brown, and Marquise Brown is only like a year or two older at most than Watson, and I think is probably going to have a much better year next year. But we'll see. I just don't think that efficiency is going to keep going for Watson. So the hyper efficiency is what you want to flip right now if you can.
I would flip him because of the questions about Aaron Rodgers. I wouldn't do it necessarily because of the efficiency directly. The inefficiency is going to be drawn from it's Jordan Love throwing the ball next year in Green Bay. At least, if I'm a scorched earth Green Bay Packers fan over here,
There you go, Bradley. It's super interesting. Just quick around the horn. You mentioned, I'm a little surprised. I guess it's, it probably is not quite updating daily on Keep Trade Cut. I'm not sure though, but I feel like there might be a little recency bias with Garrett Wilson because he's had such a big back-to-back games. But if you could pick between Olave and Wilson to have on a dynasty roster, Dan, which one are you going with?
Man, that's really tough. I'm going Garrett Wilson, just because I think he's on a better team. Olave, we've got questions. We've got questions about quarterback for both of them, but we don't have as many questions about the rest of the offense with Garrett Wilson as we do with Chris Olave. And I think having some more dangerous weapons around him helps Garrett Wilson, whereas Olave can pretty easily right now be focused on by defenses.
What about you, Bradley?
Yeah, I would take Garrett Wilson as well for similar reasons with the team, but also because New Orleans doesn't have a first-round pick to play with. In this coming year's draft, they're not looking great. They traded their first-round pick away to Philadelphia. The Eagles have set themselves up for success, and so if they're looking for are addressing the quarterback position, they're going to have to do it on the cheap, or compare that to the Jets, who, as you mentioned, like they could go out and get a Jimmy Garoppolo for a late first, which is where the Jets' first is probably going to be this year. Or they could go out and get Derek Carr, for a late first. I think that taking on a contract, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. So there's more optimism about how the Jets have been operating as a team as of late, and competitively, Lord knows what kind of offense they're going to have. So that's where I would go with Wilson.
So we just talked offense the whole show, and we rarely get defensive in the GOAT district, but every point kind of matters when you get to this point in the season. We all saw the Cleveland Browns defense put up a 30 spot this past week. Literally if you started the Browns on defense, you won your fantasy matchup unless you have a complete dud of a fantasy team. Is there any sneaky defenses that you guys are looking to add or just use? You can go as broad as you want here. Bradley, any defenses that people should be trying to scoop up that may be possibly under the radar?
Okay, so a couple of them that came to mind. One is Tennessee. Right now, their consensus defensive special teams 14. They get Jacksonville this week. Tennessee is really stingy against the running game. They get Jacksonville. They get the Chargers, who may or may not have Mike Williams back. They put a lot of pressure on their secondary, but then they get Houston week 16, and then Dallas might be like coasting by then in week 17. It's very possible. So the Titans are on the radar, but for me, the Raiders.
I love that. That's the one. That's great. Just for this matchup alone.
Right. They get the Rams, and this is the crazy thing. Adam Schefter is reporting that not only did the Rams, they claim Baker Mayfield today, but the Rams are in a position to actually consider starting Baker Mayfield. Like, that is on the table.
It's the
for
weirdest.
Thursday.
It's the weirdest. It's the weirdest story.
What is the deal? Do they not have cable in L.A.? They
McVay was watching old Oklahoma tapes. He was nostalgic, and he was watching old, Baker Mayfield Heisman Trophy year and Baker Mayfield rookie year Browns. That's the only tape he needed to see because he'll be able to mold him.
I thought maybe the cable was out. I didn't know.
Okay, so real talk about the Raiders. They're not just for this week. They get the Rams this week. They also get the Patriots at Vegas, and then they go to Pittsburgh, and then they get San Francisco with Brock Purdy week 17. And they're coming off 3 straight games of being a top 13 DST. They're not a 0. Okay. So
they get to the quarterback.
They do. And credit to Max Crosby. So I would go with the Raiders as my number 1 pickup as a sneaky DST.
Dan, anybody you're on?
Yeah, I would throw in Atlanta has got a sneaky good schedule, and right now, they're going to be on bye week 14, but then they've got the Saints, they've got Baltimore, they've got Arizona, which is a pretty nice way to get through that the playoff weeks of 15 through 17. So I'd be thinking about them as well. Most of the rest of it, though, I think you're going to be just kind of mixing and matching a little bit. Like Cleveland, I was not on them because they just have done so horrible the entire season. I was like, yeah, I know it's Houston, but how good is it going to be really? And I had like Seattle and some other teams, so I'm like, I ain't dropping any of these guys for Cleveland. Turns out maybe I should have, but oh well.
I mean, highly rostered
you're not able to predict scooping scores from the 2-yard line. What is wrong with you?
I know, right? I'm still working on my game there.
How highly rostered is Dallas going to be this week? Like in DFS?
God, yeah. Dallas is the ultimate smash.
Dallas could beat Houston, could legitimately beat Houston 42-0. It could be
that. It could be all defensive scores.
Yeah, it could be extremely ugly. I'll throw out, especially for home leagues, a lot of people are going to cut the Commanders' defense this week because of the bye. If you have a chance to stash them, that Week 15 game in Washington against New York is where Washington's going to be playing for their playoff life. That's a defense I'd be looking to stream. I really like your call on the Raiders. That was going to be my call for this week. It's kind of like we talk about, it doesn't have to be a complicated game. Like just stream the defense against the team in the horrible quarterback situation. And if they're willing to start Baker Mayfield after he gets off a plane, Sean McVay is just kind of, that's like the jump in the shark moment for Sean McVay, where you're like, what's going on here? The guy thinks he's a genius and he can just fix anything kind of deal, because that's about the worst idea that I've ever heard. They say he's learning the playbook on the plane. So he's not Christian McCaffrey.
Bryce Perkins or Baker Mayfield.
Give me Bryce Perkins.
I think I might take Bryce Perkins there too.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I'm so stuck on my priors.
It's crazy. I mean, Josh Johnson was just signed by the 49ers, and I would take Johnson over Mayfield at this point. In terms of like a veteran that you could plug in for one game, I'm rolling with Johnson, who's done it a million times. So it's definitely choppy water. Real quick, do you guys have any interest in Odell Beckham?
No.
No way.
Yeah, me neither.
None.
I think it's kind of a move on. I've wrote about him in a waiver wire column every single week as a guy where he's going to sign. Still hasn't signed, and now we're getting word that the Cowboys are apprehensive. It's just kind of a circus, and the Rams are out. I think that I'll say the only team that I would have any interest in is if it becomes a New York Giant, just because I don't think he's signing with the Giants without kind of a promise that he's going to get playing time and would have an opportunity for more targets than he would in Dallas or a team like that. But I will say you'd have to be in dire straits to add him at this point. So we can move on from that. Let's talk.
Let me go back real quick on defenses, just in case, for those of us who are, anybody who doesn't play in the really deep leagues, if it's possible in your league that the Chiefs defense, if you're playing in, more shallow or less sharp leagues, the Chiefs defense could be available. If they are, they're a great one to snap up. They've probably got about the best schedule, I think, left of anybody, because they get Denver a couple times, they get Houston, they get Seattle. So
week 17 Denver. Right. So that's like pin your ears back and you get 15 defensive points. So yeah, that's a great call by Dan, because they a lot of times in these home leagues you'll see people kind of be reactionary to what happened this past week, and as soon as the defense lets up a decent sized score, but that Cincinnati offense is just humming. and the game was in Cincinnati. So obviously Kansas City, I think that's a great call. Love Bradley's call on the Raiders. It's fun getting defensive every now and then, but we want to stress to everyone we have no interest in IDP in the GO district. We'll leave that to Bradley. Let's talk a Dan Williamson specialty. Let's talk tight end. What among the guys that like the low end tight end ones and kind of the tight end 2 group, is there anybody maybe you're a little bit more bullish on than consensus that you would be happy to be using this week and maybe for the rest of the fantasy playoffs? Dan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Greg Dulcich with with Denver. He had some bad weeks. He really came roaring back this week. I mean, it was kind of helped out by Cortland Sutton, blowing out his hammy, I think it was. So you have to feel all right about him. I mean, if you're feeling really good about any tight end, you're probably deluding yourself at this point. But Daniel Bellinger, another one I probably feel at least decent about. They're just starved for good targets, and for the Giants.
5 catches this past week. 5 catches.
Yeah, he's not going to get a ton of yards. He's not going to get a ton of touchdowns. But if he's getting the targets and getting the catches, he can at least kind of keep you afloat. Tyler Conklin's been very hit and miss, but. Noah Fant, we kind of talked about already. I'd even throw Will Dissly in there as, kind of an emergency start. And Chig Okonkwo, we talked about already. So those are some names I'd be thinking about if you really need them. What do you think, Brad?
One name in that, high-end tight end 2 range, Hunter Henry for this week in particular, gets Arizona. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And they allow the most fantasy points per game to the tight end position, 15.5 fantasy points per game in a half point. That's Travis Kelce level. Okay. You're getting a streaming Travis Kelce every week. And we've seen ceiling games from Hunter Henry. It's not like he hasn't done anything this year. He's had a tight end 4 finish against Cleveland.
He almost had two touchdown catches just 2 weeks back. Had one.
He was the tight end 3 against Minnesota, right? And now he gets Arizona, but also the following week he gets Vegas, and then Cincinnati, and then Miami. Those are games where you can imagine Mac Jones is going to have to play catch up. So Hunter Henry is an interesting play, not just for this week, but moving forward. You mentioned Dulcich. He has a tough matchup this week against Willie Gay, the linebacker. So there's the IDP sprinkling in. But, you can't hate the amount of targets he's had. He's running all of the routes. And you mentioned with Sutton being out, right? 6 for 85. He didn't score a touchdown and was still a top 4 tight end. That's how bad the tight end position is. Right now. It's real gross. And if someone drops Taysom Hill this week because of the bye week, he needs to be scooped up just because you saw what happened yesterday. He's skilled enough. They're going to give him some touches. Alvin Kamara, you can't trust him as much, as you'd like. So Taysom Hill's going to get a few more sprinkled in, and he's probably going to qualify. So yeah, I think that David Njoku is also someone that has fallen off the radar, needs to be put back on it. Njoku, when he was healthy, was the tight end 2, tight end 6, tight end 5, tight end 8, over the last few games. So you need to be picking him up. He's the consensus tight end 22 this week on Fantasy Pros, David Njoku. So
I suspect that would probably go up if we knew for sure he was playing.
Right.
Yeah, I love Dan's call on Bellinger. Dulcich, I would have it as the top of this tier, just because I think with Sutton out, I think he's got the highest ceiling. I like the Bellinger call just because I think he's got a safe target floor. I think that he's going to be used. We talked about Chig a little bit earlier, and I love Bradley's call on Hunter Henry. Let's give a quick shout out to the FFPC. Dan, are you getting excited about maybe some of the postseason contests coming up in the FFPC?
Yeah, the postseason contests are always fun. It's it's an easy contest, but it's a really hard contest. I mean, all you need to do is just pick 10 players, easy, right? But, figuring out exactly which 10 players, and you can only have one from each team, which teams are you going to fade, which players are going to be high owned, which ones are going to be low owned. It's like peeling an onion, there's just layer after layer after layer of strategy in there. And, I really enjoy that part of it almost as much as anything else, just trying to figure out what the ownerships are going to be and, how to put together a decent team. So I haven't had a big cash on that yet, but
it's coming, Dan. It's coming. It's coming.
I mean, if Austin can do it, right?
Yeah, no, shout out to Austin Martin, who was on the pod, and he shipped that one, won a few dollars. Shout out to the IRS. We're not going to talk about how much people win in fantasy, but he won a significant amount of money. Let's talk about quickly talk about the Miami running back position. It got kind of turned on its head slightly this week, usage-wise. Mike McDaniel, we love him for fantasy for what he does with wide receivers, and we love him for running back production, but we don't necessarily love what he's doing in terms of running back predictability. Do you guys have apprehension about using Jeff Wilson this week in an important Week 14? And do you think that maybe Mostert's going to be worked in a little bit more? Are you looking to start both? Are you avoiding it? I mean, how are you handling this? Either one of you guys.
I'll start. I mean, if you're not nervous about starting somebody who got you 0.3 points last week, you probably need to find a new hobby. So yeah, I'm nervous about it.
Don't fear the Reaper with Miami Dolphins.
But on the other hand, I mean, last week is last week, and you can't necessarily hold that against him. He could, he is a big part of that offense. Just kind of the game flow took both him and Mostert out, I thought, pretty much, where they just neither one of them was doing as much. So, I don't mind sticking Wilson in there. I mean, it's definitely shaking my confidence a little bit, but if I need him, I'm throwing him in there. I'm not gonna be putting in, I don't know. I'm not gonna put in like Chuba Hubbard over him or something like that.
Bradley, what's your take on the situation there?
Yeah, I think you have to roll with Mostert, unfortunately, until you see it from Jeff Wilson this past week. 87.5% rush share for Raheem Mostert. Jeff Wilson left the Week 12 game with an injury. It was described as cramps, but I wonder if there were just some lingering issues or if the coaches just wanted to give him a rest against his previous team. So much for the revenge game narrative, right, guys? But this week, I have low confidence in both players, but they have a real smash matchup against the LA Chargers. This is the Chargers give up a lot of fancy points to the running back position. We know that, but it's also at the offensive defensive line. Miami Dolphins have a 42% run block advantage per PFF going into this game. So if there's room to run, it could be Mostert, it could be Wilson, it could be both of them, right? And that's why we're frustrated, because if we knew that it was going to be one guy or the other, like automatic running back 2 start with running back 1 upside. But the problem is our confidence has been shaken the last couple of games, and we have a feeling that it's going to be one of these guys popping off, but to pick which one, that's going to be really tough.
Yeah, it's a really, I'm done trying to figure it out, because we think a guy gets dusted and then he goes back to the other one. I will say that one thing in the preseason that we talked about a little bit with Jeff Wilson, and especially in the early season when he took over the San Francisco backfield, was he's never played more than 12 games in an NFL season prior to this one. So I wonder if he's just the kind of guy that definitely breaks down with the usage, and McDaniel's seeing the writing on the wall. I'd certainly be more happy about using Mostert. But again, like Dan said, you have to be in a decent situation to be able to bench Wilson. And I think a lot of people are not there, especially with all these bye week teams. Talking about a much more clear situation, and this is a question that JD and I discussed with Pat Carrain last night, so I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Lost in the Josh Jacobs smash season is Devontae Adams is having like the quietest league-winning season ever. He's red hot with 22 catches, 4 touchdowns, 392 yards in his last 3 games. And he leads the league with 664 yards receiving over the last 5 weeks. Is he the wide receiver 1 rest of the season? Maybe share your thoughts on Adams. And would you take another wide receiver on him another wide receiver besides him moving forward? Start with Bradley.
Yeah, this is, we play a week-to-week matchup, and Davante Adams is a really, really nice matchup this week, too, to continue this streak against the LA Rams. They're not as shut down as they once were or had been considered. Jalen Ramsey has given up some big plays. Plus, the PFF gives Adams an 84% advantage over the secondary. And then the offensive line for Vegas, too, has a significant advantage. So this is a game this week that's huge. But then also moving forward, like there are some plus and minus matchups. He gets New England week 15 at Pittsburgh. That secondary has played tough from time to time. And then San Francisco is one of the most difficult in the week 17 matchup there, Theo. So I am, concerned about the championship. But this week 14, it's going to be hard to rank him as not the wide receiver 1 overall for this week, even though there are a couple more tougher matchups later on. Plus, I think you can see wide receiver 1 ceiling, but you're going to get Darren Waller back projected for week 15. There's been rumblings about Hunter Renfrow coming back this week, but definitely in week 15. So I think that there are 2 significant pass catchers that are going to take away the highest of ceilings from Davante Adams' target share. Like Adams is still going to get his 30 to 32%, but he's not going to get 40, 45% target share with Waller and Renfrow back in there. It's been really consolidated target share, just Adams and Jacobs primarily with a sprinkling of Mac Hollins. So I think that target share is going to go down. Could he be the wide receiver 1 rest of the season? Yes, though.
Would you take a different wide receiver over him? If you could have one to roster for the rest of the season, like, are you going Tyreek Hill? Are you going which way, Justin Jefferson, or are you sticking with Adams?
I mean, I think that you have to go with Adams, but here's a dark horse one that I would love to chat, and I'd love to just drop it in the beehive.
Let me guess. Are you going to throw out Amon-Ra St. Brown?
I am going to throw out Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Okay, there you go, Bradley.
I'm batting the beehive with Amon-Ra St. Brown. St. Brown has 3 top 3 wide receiver finishes on the year. He gets Minnesota, he gets the Jets, Carolina, and then Chicago week 17 in a dome. Okay, and the Bears give up some of the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. We talk about possible shootout opportunity, like that week 17 game is just perfect script for it. And Amon-Ra St. Brown this week against Minnesota is the highest projected PFF advantage over cornerbacks. And the Vikings, as we mentioned, give up the most receiving yards to wide receivers on the season. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's my dark horse wide receiver 1 overall rest of the season.
Love it. Dan, your thoughts on this? Would you rather have Davante Adams, or is there another particular wide receiver that you would rather have for the rest of the season?
I mean, yeah, I like Davante Adams a lot. He does have some tougher games coming up, which you guys may have mentioned while I was wrestling with my internet and trying to get it working again. But, I don't love his schedule, but I think he's also kind of matchup proof for the most part. So I'll roll with Davante Adams and feel real good about it. I love the Amon-Ra St. Brown call. Another one that I think, not the world's greatest matchups, but Justin Jefferson. He's on a tear, and he doesn't have any matchups that are particularly difficult. He just doesn't have any great matchups coming up.
And I really do believe that you're going to need at least one of these elite wide receivers are going to, be the ones deciding, the overalls, especially in the high stakes formats. They're so impactful to have these guys who can put up a 35-point week. It's very important. And I do think I would go with Davante Adams. I'm extremely bullish on him moving forward. I get the argument that maybe a banged-up Jalen Waddle might help Tyreek Hill, but I think there could be a matchup in the playoffs where, defenses are eventually able to focus a little bit more on Hill and at least slow him down, where he's a 100 yards type game with no touchdowns, where that he maybe finishes his wide receiver 12 range, where I don't necessarily see that with Adams. I just think he's a very safe target floor, especially with the threat of Josh Jacobs. We're at an hour and 10 minutes. Bradley's been very generous with his time here. We really want to get your league winners, Bradley. You can start with the cream of the crop blue chippers, and then I want you to give us a couple of these off the radar guys, maybe a particular RB2 or 3, maybe a wide receiver 3 that you'd love to have on your fantasy rosters in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, DeAndre Swift should be on there. He's got look, he finished this past week as the running back 5 overall, and we mentioned the Detroit has the schedule that's really interesting, but it's not just that the schedule is interesting. It's that DeAndre Swift has the talent profile, and now he's getting the usage, right? The training wheels are off from the weeks where he had missed from injury. 14 carries, 6 targets. That's 20 opportunities for DeAndre Swift, and he's being undervalued completely. I think this is a player who, we were drafting end of the first round, beginning of the second round, and for good reason, because he has he's the Alvin Kamara type. He's that type of profile. And so if I feel like I'm team Lions, and unfortunately, I'm so close to Detroit that people are like, you've got the blue glasses on, Bradley. What is going on with you? But it's going to be Lions here near the end of the season. They're sixth in team points on the season. They've got good matchups, and Swift is there. That's interesting to me. Zonovan Knight, we mentioned earlier in the podcast, as someone who is extremely sneaky. He looks to be getting a majority of share in the Jets' backfield. You want to be taking a shot on him. I wish I could have been more bullish on Kyren Williams. That's a player that in PPR, if we get some stability just dumping off the ball to Kyren Williams, he could be very, very interesting in a flex position. This is a player who at Notre Dame, 190 carries each of the last 2 seasons, 11% target share, was capable at running back. So if the Rams aren't playing for anything, that they might just give the ball to this day 3 rookie that they know what they have in Cam Akers. Let's find out what we have in Kyren Williams moving forward. So those are some players from running back. And then at wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk needs to be, on the up and up. I know that there's the questions of quarterback, but with Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey cannibalizing each other, I would be very interested to see how aggressive the likes of Brock Purdy would be with Brandon Ayuk, and he might be undervalued. And Treylon Burks is left for dead in some projections. He's wide receiver 38. I think he's going to play, and I think that the Tennessee Titans, they just fired their GM. That's so bizarre, right?
There's got to be something behind the scenes that we don't see because of the timing.
Right, but Treylon Burks is a player that was drafted by the GM, and they'll be playing for the playoffs the rest of the way. It's very rare that you see a GM fired when you're 3 games ahead of your division mates or the next closest. So those are some players that I would consider. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can get one more deep cut, but in the meantime, Isaiah Hodgins. There we go. Isaiah Hodgins, extremely deep cut for the New York Giants. He played majority of snaps. This is a player who, yes, he'll get Philadelphia this week, but it's Washington, Minnesota, and then, Indianapolis week 17. He finished with 10 fantasy points, 6 targets. He's played some snaps as of late, and this was a player who was out of Buffalo a few years back. So it's been rotating for the Giants, but someone's got to catch target share, and it's not going to be Dante Pettis. So there's a really deep cut for you, Isaiah Hodgins.
Well, you heard it here first, Dan. Isaiah Hodgins, league winner from Bradley Stadler.
But by the way, I can shed a little light on the John Robinson thing. My understanding is that he was actually playing beer pong with Todd Downing in the flight on the flight home, in the middle of the aisle on that charter flight. So I think that's what it was.
What's going on we're getting a lot of NFL flight stories this year. We had Russell Wilson working out on the plane. Now we have the beer pong story.
Kirk Cousins with the old
Kirk
chain.
Cousins,
Right?
yeah.
Cousins with the chains, and then now you have
OBJ.
Baker Mayfield with his
Nose in the books.
his photographic memory to be able to memorize a playbook in literally a cross country flight. Anyway, Bradley, this was awesome. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder, the YouTube channel Best Bell Fantasy. We're growing a lot over there, putting up a lot of content, pumping it out weekly, and then also during the off season, I'm excited to get some more deep dives and player comparisons for you, but also some structural things. I think that's one thing that I want to focus more on this year is fewer player takes in the best ball and more focusing on how can I structure my teams to optimize for these types of Week 17 conversations.
We'd love to have you back on to draft best ball with us. We're going to get those going pretty much as soon as the Super Bowl's over, maybe before, Dan. Dan, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can catch me at Overhyped Sleeper, drop the final E from Sleeper. I definitely will be drafting best balls before the Super Bowl, as long as I have a forum to do it in, and I am absolutely sure that the FFPC, if no one else, will definitely provide that for us. So looking forward to that. But, first we got to finish off this year. So we want to finish off strong, make sure you're, this whole show is just get out there, be checking that waiver wire, dig deep, think hard about, what kind of players are going to work for you. Just get through this week, get into next week, and get through the sprint.
Yeah, 100%. Dan and I are going to ship our FFPC main event team this week. I feel really good about it. We're playing for a lot right now in the GOAT District, and I hope our listeners are as well. Thanks again to Bradley. Tune in Thursday night. We're going to be back. We have a tailgate, and we have the defending FFPC main event champions, Go Bills, Nick Costantino, Dom Baragni, and Sean Stutzman. Really good guys. We got to meet them in Vegas. Dan and I were out there for the main event. Really good guys. They listen to the show. Very, very sharp players. I compete against a couple of those guys in leagues. I've drafted against those guys. They're no joke, and obviously they have the receipts to show for it. And then Friday, Dan and I are going to be sitting down on a 3 p.m. show with Adam Levitan of Establish the Run. We're loading it up this week. Thanks for joining us in the district, and everybody have a great night.